Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Terima kasih Profesor Dr. Faiz. Kenyataan beliau itu membantu kerana kita dalam kempen pilihan raya. I would say, referring to his initial remarks, very kind, very supportive, slight exaggeration, but it would help me immensely in this night of this campaign in the elections in the 6 states. Menteri Luar, Amerika Timbalan Menteri Lu Chintong, Pengeran Dato Sazaina, tamu-tamu yang dimuliakan, tuan-tuan yang terutama, duta-duta dan rakan-rakan sekalian. Tentunya Malaysia berbangga kerana dapat meneruskan sidang antarabangsa, terutama Asia-Pacific, yang memberikan ruang kepada saya dan rakan-rakan membincang dan menentukan hala 7 negara dan dasar yang boleh membantu mengikat berdasarkan prinsip keamanan, demokrasi dan juga kerjasama sejagat. Dan oleh yang demikian saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Dr. Faiz dan ISIS kerana meneruskan tradisi wacana yang segar ini. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the last time I delivered a keynote address at the Asia-Pacific Roundtable was at its 8th iteration in 1994. Therefore, it is indeed a pleasure to return to this distinguished gathering after almost 3 decades. Goodness, I survived. The issues that you deliberate on, while rooted in this region, ultimately have a bearing on every part of the globe. Even more so as Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific becomes the center of the global economy and strategic calculus. Since I last addressed the APR, this region has undergone tremendous changes, significantly altering its geopolitical landscape and triggering geostrategic recalibration among nations. The strategic assumptions that long shaped the Asia-Pacific have been transformed in the age of flux, where the only certainty now is that of uncertainty. If this sounds rather ominous, indeed it is, and will not bode well for the region unless carefully managed. To begin with, the intensifying major power rivalry between China and the United States is testing and straining the fabric of the region's long-standing architecture and norms. The rivalry has led to the emergence of new minilateral groupings across the board, while despite the window dressing could be cast as exclusive and exclusionary in nature. These geopolitical developments have overshadowed some regional mechanisms and multilateral frameworks, calling into question their resilience and readiness, even relevance, to upholding peace, prosperity, and security in the Asia-Pacific. We are also seeing a growing trend of division and bifurcation across a spectrum of segments, chiefly now impacting both trade and technology. The race for cutting-edge technology, like the semiconductor industry, which could have taken a productive turn, is instead now another major source of hostility between both powers, the so-called chip war. Sanctions and export reductions, countermoves, along with other tit-for-tat maneuvers, will have ramifications to both global supply chains and the overall trends of economic cooperation. And of course, it doesn't end there. Indeed, these bilateral dynamics are influencing how major powers engage with third nations that are inevitably caught up in the cleaving systems, rules, and even norms. This further adds pressure and constraints to developing countries as they seek the best options from all stakeholders and providers. Under the weight of such stresses, there is a drastic need to revitalize not just cooperation among nations, but greater inclusivity and equity. Yet, truth be told, there seems to be no urgency to address this. Some have spoken of Southeast Asia being a key part of the chessboard of the new great game waged between Beijing and Washington, as the latter once did against Moscow. While the major powers continue to assure that a binary choice is not being imposed, the reality of countries in Southeast Asia, and indeed many other countries in the Asia-Pacific, is that it is the only choice offered, if not by word, then by deed. It would be a great loss for the entire region if this unfettered rivalry affects all that have been painstakingly achieved by existing and consequential ASEAN-led multilateral mechanisms. Their success relies on the culminative efforts put in by ASEAN and our partners to create inclusive venues where policymakers and thought leaders of the Asia-Pacific, be they from major, middle, or small powers, meet as equals. Closer to home, we see aspects of these dynamics increasingly play out in critical and long-standing issues that we face in Southeast Asia. In the South China Sea, we are seeing elements of major power rivalry seeping into the territorial disputes, intentionally or otherwise. For Malaysia's part, we have always advocated for the peaceful and constructive settlement of all disputes in accordance with the universally recognized norms and principles of international law, including the 1982 United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. The continued militarization of the maritime region, coupled with the use of grey zone tactics to reinforce claims and stimulate the lawful exploitation of resources, is neither peaceful nor constructive. Added to this dangerous mix are reports which continue to stream in on the deteriorating maritime ecosystems and fish stocks devastated by illegal and unregulated fishing. Malaysia remains consistent in its stance, including on the protection of our sovereignty, rights and interests in our exclusive economic zones in the South China Sea. We do so unwaveringly in the face of all legitimate challenges and claims. Distinguished ladies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's not wrong to say distinguished ladies. In the light of this, it bears stressing that Malaysia's security lies in and with the region and not from the region. We leverage on our geographical location as both a land and maritime country straddling the most important trade routes and economic position as a key part of various global supply chains to promote regional security. Contuminously, on the geopolitical front, Malaysia must continue to ride on our good relations with both China and the United States to promote stronger rules and norms-based order. This order is not based on might or the tendency to ignore the very rules and norms one preaches about what it is inconvenient, when it is inconvenient. This is unconducive and hypocritical. What's good for the goose must be good for the gander. So it must be an order based on fairness, respect and understanding, compassion and international law. This, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, is not a pie in the sky, because in our estimation, both China and the United States have affirmed their commitment to it. It must go beyond multilateral trade dealings to the realm of practical geostrategic architecture. Indeed, there must be a serious effort to give effect to these grandiloquent terms. Malaysia will do our part to promote this consensus. It is imperative that this new consensus of global security takes into account the views of the global South, without detracting from the contentions of the age of uncertainty. An objective overview of the current geopolitical landscape projects the global South as showing signs of greater strategic independence. In any event, this development shouldn't be a cause for concern. For Malaysia, this is a natural evolution of a process that began with national independence and should therefore be respected and promoted. Accordingly, Malaysia will engage proactively and independently with various initiatives by regional powers and stakeholders in both Asia and Indo-Pacific. We do so with a clear view of our national interests and priorities, which is deeply tied to upkeep of inclusive regional architecture. While T.S. Eliot reminds us that history may be servitude, history may be freedom, yet the lessons of history are to be ignored only at our peril. In this vein, recent history has shown that there is an unbroken linkage between national security, national resilience, good governance, and democratic accountability. Under our unity government here, Malaysia is strengthening all four. We all affirm our commitment to comprehensive security for the ultimate objective of ensuring stability, order, and peace. In these times of division and uncertainty, ASEAN and its member states must meet its challenges head-on. But first and foremost, it is necessary to resolve ASEAN's increasingly fractured unity. We must cast off inertia and actively seek opportunities that emphasize inclusive, multilateral approaches and reinforce ASEAN-centered mechanisms. Redouble efforts, not just with existing dialogue partners, but looking further afield to offer multilateral and regional groupings in Central Asia or the South Pacific that share similar interests. Only together can we truly stem the slide into a divided world steeped in rivalry. Now, this is not a mere exhortation, because we can deliver. ASEAN, as a regional setup, must continue this mechanism of meaningful dialogues. I must commend the Indonesian president chairing the present ASEAN, the chair of ASEAN, that took an additional effort in the last session with ASEAN leaders to frankly encourage an exchange that, to my mind, is extremely meaningful and enriching. Rarely do we have leaders exhorting and displaying such frankness just to secure that sort of a new consensus between ASEAN leaders. And certainly this is a good beginning, and we should continue in the next session, ASEAN leaders meeting in Jakarta next month. ASEAN must be stronger and more resilient. All-out war between nation states, once thought as a relic of the past, ripples through Europe, and with its destruction of lives, property, communities, prosperity, and principles of laws, that took decades to build. Elsewhere, never-ending cycles of civil wars raged without much interest or care by the international community. In the Asia-Pacific, the risks caused by climate change and ecological disasters are even more acute, leading to a need for more coordinated regional response. All this, in turn, increases the push factors for the forced migration of people desperate to escape from their devastated conditions. Make no mistake, Southeast Asia is not immune to these challenges and tragedies. Far from it. The continued post-coup violence and instability in Myanmar remains one of ASEAN's biggest strategic and humanitarian challenges. It is also a tragic reversal for a member of our ASEAN family that held such promise. Now more than ever, the imperative of ASEAN unity and centrality cannot be overstressed. Failure to act will be tantamount to a dereliction of collective responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, from the exponential rise in the cost of food, commodities, and energy to unreliable and more expensive supply chains, many have had to face uncertainty at the day-to-day level, with governments scrambling to plug the gaps. This is a double blow coming on the back of a world that is still recovering from the many challenges brought about by the global pandemic. Here in Malaysia, in the face of aforementioned challenges, plus fluctuating inflation, we have undertaken significant efforts to control the cost of living and provide alternatives which bring added fiscal stability to the lives of Malaysians, especially those most vulnerable among us. We have launched the Madani economy to boost the Malaysian economy and empower the people by addressing the various challenges and issues related to our competitiveness in the global area. The primary strategic thrust here is to restructure the economy towards making Malaysia a leading Asian economy and providing the people with the benefits to enjoy a better quality of life, elevating the status and dignity of the nation. Malaysia is determined to strive ahead to be a more equitable, accountable, and sustainable nation. Given the national, regional, and global circumstances, we cannot continue old practices and risk losing our regional attractiveness and competitive advantages. It is no exaggeration to say that we are now seeing a recognition that long-held approaches to international relations, to regional architecture and their global governance mechanisms have long been dominated by Western-centric or Eurocentric characteristics. How sustainable or equitable is this in a diverse world, where regions like Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, various parts of Asia, even the South Pacific, are increasingly demanding their rightful seat at the decision-making table. The rumblings we have seen both in the Asia-Pacific and beyond have clearly showed that it cannot be business as usual any further. What shape or form the emerging world might take is still up for debate. A primary characteristic, however, has to be an international system that is politically and culturally diverse, but economically and functionally interconnected. Achieving this requires tolerance, understanding, and cooperation. We now see higher quality free trade agreements, standards of governance, and better access to technologies at lower barriers for entry, thanks in part to healthy rivalry. Southeast Asia ought to leverage our competitive advantages and the opportunities provided by our major external partners. Nevertheless, unfettered competition is different. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is rivalry between nation states, between the major powers, becoming increasingly marked by zero-sum calculations and assumptions. This only leads to a dark, self-destructive action-reaction spiral. Under these circumstances, any semblance of victory is pyrrhic. Yet it is not all doom and gloom. These challenges, they are encouraging signs of progress in the Asia-Pacific region, many of them centered here in Southeast Asia. Despite being severely battered by the global pandemic, the region has rallied and have put in place more proactive mechanisms to face prospective black swan events. We have done this not just with its member states, but in cooperation with its dialogue partners and global institutions. The ASEAN community has come into its own, and we are now just 2 years away from the culmination of ASEAN's Vision 2025. In the context of Asia-Pacific, the sure but steady progress of ASEAN into a more integrated, cohesive, competitive, innovative, and dynamic community at the time of fluid global geopolitics and geoeconomics is surely among the region's unsung successes. ASEAN is determined to ensure the long-term effectiveness and resilience of the regional organization against uncertain geopolitical trends, and is in ensuring that it is more relevant to its domestic audiences and stakeholders. I am pleased to note that as one of the co-chairs of the post-2025 high-level task force, Malaysia has been committed to this process and will continue to shepherd the shaping of the core elements that will make up the post-2025 vision and their tangible measurements. Distinguished delegates, despite the challenges of uncertainty ahead of us, I remain optimistic that they can be overcome. That uncertainty can be turned into an opportunity. Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific is a region of significant promise. The onus is on all of us to be responsible, to not lock ourselves into a downward spiral, feeding on our worst suspicions towards each other. Together, we can find solutions that will lead to a prosperous, sustainable, and just future. Discussions such as the Asia-Pacific Roundtable play a key role in this process. Your deliberations will continue to tackle some of the most pressing challenges we face. I look forward to the outcomes of these discussions, inshallah. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.